Welcome, everyone, to a journey into a culture that often feels both beautifully familiar and deeply mysterious. Today, we are going to embark on a multi course philosophical exploration. Think of it as a kaiseki meal for your mind. Our guide for this feast is the brilliant thinker Professor Xu Ying, who presents us with a master key to unlocking the Japanese worldview. His profound framework centers entirely on a single powerful concept, Aimai, which loosely translates to ambiguity. But as we will discover together, this idea of ambiguity is not a flaw or a lack of clarity. It is the golden thread that weaves together the very fabric of Japan's art, its language, its philosophy, and its society. By looking at the world through the lens of Aimai, we can move far beyond the surface level stereotypes and finally grasp the deep underlying logic of the Japanese mind. When we say Aimai, it is crucial to understand that we do not simply mean being vague or indecisive. Aimai is a profound worldview. Think of the acclaimed movie Shoplifters by director Hirokazu Koreeda. When you finish watching that film, you aren't handed a simple black and white moral lesson. Instead, the director leaves you with a rich, lingering space for contemplation, resisting the urge to provide clear moral judgments. That is Aimai in action. It is primarily an aesthetic experience that creates room for multiple interpretations. If we compare this to other cultures, the contrast is striking. In Chinese culture, the guiding principle is often the golden mean, which is primarily a moral concept about finding a balanced path between extremes to determine what is right and wrong. In the West, shaped heavily by a monotheistic background, the drive is often toward attachment or fixation, reducing the vast multiplicity of the world down to a single absolute truth. Aimai resists this singular obsession, believing that explicit, overly logical expression actually destroys the beautiful atmosphere of reality. To truly grasp this concept of Aimai, we first need to clear away some old, very popular misunderstandings. Many of us are familiar with Ruth Benedict's famous book, The Chrysanthemum and the Sword. While it is a classic, we have to remember it was written to serve US wartime policy, which led to some significant misinterpretations of Japanese culture. Benedict looked at the rigid, absolute loyalty demanded by the Meiji government, specifically citing the 1882 imperial rescript to soldiers and sailors, and mistakenly argued that this militaristic fanaticism was traditional Japanese culture. It wasn't. In fact, traditional stories like the tale of the 47 Ronin celebrate loyalty to a local lord over loyalty to the central state, a tradition of the righteous knight that Meiji militarism actually wanted to destroy. Furthermore, Benedict famously labeled Japan a shame culture, arguing that Japanese people are uniquely sensitive to external social rules. But the sensitivity to etiquette isn't unique to Japan. During World War II, British observers often found American soldiers to be brash and lacking in decorum, showing a similar cultural friction. We have to look deeper than shame and swords. So, if the old models are flawed, what is a better way to look at it? Enter the Japanese thinker Uchida Tatsuru, who gives us a fascinating geographical explanation for Aimai in his concept of Japan as a borderland culture. Because Japan is an island nation, it exists on the edge of the continent, not at the center. This geographical reality creates a dual consciousness. On one hand, Japan has a long history of being entirely open to cultural exchange. On the other hand, it has periods of total isolation, or sakoku. Living on the borderland naturally blurs the hard distinctions between US and them. This perfectly explains why foreign elements are adopted so easily and quickly integrated as native. Whether it is kanji characters borrowed from China or English loanwords seamlessly integrated into daily conversation, the Japanese emotionally perceive these foreign additions as part of their own culture. Uchida Tatsuru points out that this leads to learning as an instinct. Rather than asking why they should learn something, the approach is simply to absorb everything first without a predefined goal, allowing the boundaries of identity to remain wonderfully ambiguous. Now, let's look at how this ambiguity is literally hardwired into the everyday grammar of the Japanese language. Aimai operates at the deepest linguistic levels to blur fundamental distinctions. First, the line between subject and predicate is blurred. Western thought typically views a subject as a solid core, like a nail, with properties acting as coats hung upon it. The Japanese language, however, uses particles to create a loose field. Instead of saying a person's English is skillful, the structure is more like a onion-like field where English ability is an inseparable part of the person's overall atmosphere rather than a detachable property. Second, the Japanese language beautifully blurs the line between fact and value. By using the passive voice in sentences like the teacher was escaped from by his wife, the speaker subtly embeds an emotional state into a purely factual statement. Finally, the language blurs physical nature and social relationships. The choice of words for this and that isn't just about physical distance. A speaker might refer to a nearby object using a word that implies distance simply to test a social boundary or suggest emotional closeness to another person. This deep linguistic ambiguity brings us to a brilliant concept proposed by the cognitive linguist Kindaichi Haruhiko. He argues that different cultures operate with fundamentally different default mental perspectives. In the West, the default is often what we can call God's view. This is an objective, external, and omniscient perspective. When describing a scene, a Western speaker sees the event from the outside, looking down from above. Conversely, the Japanese default is the insect's view. This is a highly subjective, immersed, first person perspective, like a bug crawling on the ground, experiencing the world immediately around it. This is exactly why the famous opening line of Yasunari Kawabata's novel, Snow Country, reads, exiting the long tunnel, it was the snow country. The subject of the sentence, the train, is entirely omitted because the narrator is literally inside the train. From the insect's view, you cannot step outside the train to see it objectively. You just describe the raw, immediate perception of the world unfolding before your eyes. To give this worldview a truly rigorous foundation, we turn to the heavy hitter of Japanese philosophy, Nishida Kitaro, the founder of the Kyoto school. Nishida developed a philosophy to properly articulate this Eastern experience, intentionally moving beyond the Western models we inherited from Aristotle. The Aristotelian model is built on subject logic. The world is made of distinct, solid entities with attached properties, perfectly mirroring a language where a subject is simply paired with a predicate. Nishida argued that this is entirely backward. He proposed the logic of place, arguing for a more fundamental reality, a field or primordial soup that exists long before you ever split the world into subjects and objects. Imagine a boiling pot of soup. The subjects and predicates only emerge from this soup temporarily, defined entirely by their relationship within it. The soup itself, the enabling context, cannot be captured by simple subject-predicate language. This place is inherently ambiguous, completely overturning clear-cut Western distinctions and proving that relationships are primary, while individual entities are secondary. Building on this, let's explore the brilliant philosopher Kuki Shuzo, who built an entire philosophical system around the concept of contingency to reveal the precarious nature of our reality. Kuki defines a contingent event as the shocking intersection of two forces: necessity, the causal chain of signs that makes an event happen, and impossibility, the deeply human feeling that this event absolutely shouldn't have happened. Take the tragic bombing of Nagasaki. The B-29 bomber, the weapon, and the flight plan were all matters of cold scientific necessity, but the primary target was actually the city of Kokura. It was only because of a simple, unpredictable layer of clouds over Kokura that the bomber diverted to Nagasaki. For the people of Nagasaki, the event felt utterly impossible. This profound philosophical insight shows us that our reality is constantly surrounded by a vast number of possible worlds that were just one tiny variable, like a single cloud, away from occurring. This constant awareness that things could easily have been very different creates a frosted glass view of the world, serving as the ultimate philosophical root of Aimai. These deep philosophical ideas of place and contingency are not just abstract academic theories, they are deeply felt experiences expressed every day through Japanese aesthetics. You can see this clearly in two famous concepts. The first is mono no aware, or the pathos of things. This is that gentle, lingering sadness and deep appreciation you feel for the transient beauty of cherry blossoms, precisely because you know they will soon fall. It is deeply connected to contingency. Even a great military victory in classic literature is viewed with sadness, because everyone is aware that with one tiny change in luck, it could easily have been a crushing defeat. The second concept is Wabi-Sabi, the beauty of imperfection. While a perfectly symmetrical, flawless vase follows a rigid, necessary design, a Wabi-Sabi teacup intentionally features an accidental crack or asymmetric shape. That crack didn't have to be there. It could have formed differently, or not at all. This intentional imperfection invites us to contemplate all those other possibilities, enriching its beauty through the power of contingency. Now, let's take Kuki Shuzo's philosophy of contingency and apply it directly to human relationships, specifically through the fascinating culture of the geisha and the aesthetic of iki. The geisha culture is a highly refined art of human encounter. Kuki analyzed the aesthetic of iki as the absolute perfect expression of contingency between two people. It consists of three interacting forces. First is bitai, or allure, the pull of attraction, and the force of necessity, trying to bring two people together. But if they just come together, the game ends. So the second force is ikiji, or pride and mettle, the self-respect and force of impossibility that firmly keeps them apart. Finally, there is akirame, a detached, Buddhist-like resignation and acceptance of the transient nature of the encounter. The result is a relationship that hovers right at the thrilling single point where the wheel of necessity barely touches the ground of impossibility. It is a gorgeous, cultivated ambiguity. This love for ambiguity trickles down into the most everyday visual choices in Japanese life. The colors of a kimono, the patterns on fabric, and the materials used to build a tea house. In terms of color, Japanese aesthetics heavily favor subdued, ambiguous hues. Kuki Shuzo specifically analyzed the colors like grayish blue and brown tea. He noted that in low light, a specific blue retains its proud identity while simultaneously merging beautifully into the darkness, perfectly displaying both pride and allure at the same time. When it comes to patterns, simple parallel lines are highly favored because they are inherently ambiguous. They suggest unity since they move in the exact same direction, yet they suggest eternal separation because they will never actually meet. Even architectural materials reveal deep psychology. While a low-born ruler like Toyotomi Hideyoshi used flashy gold to project power and cover his insecurities, the high-born aristocrat Tokugawa Ieyasu favored subdued, rustic materials because he was completely confident in his status and didn't need to shout. So, where does all this come from? Why is Japan so perfectly wired for ambiguity? The philosopher Watsuji Tetsuro offers a brilliant answer through his concept of fudo, which explains how a nation's specific climate and geography deeply shape its character. Japan's Fudo is defined by constant, unpredictable natural disasters, typhoons, massive earthquakes, and active volcanoes. This perpetual environmental uncertainty essentially scares the culture into accepting ambiguity and sudden impermanence as the natural default state of life. When you combine this volatile natural environment with a long history of feudal fragmentation, you get a society with no single absolute center of power. Watsuji describes this as the frosted glass effect. Japan operates like a collection of different subcultures separated by frosted glass. People are connected and aware of each other, but never fully 100% transparent to one another. This specific social structure makes ambiguity the safest and most natural mode of interaction. This brings us to one of the most mysterious aspects of Japanese culture for outsiders, the blurred boundary between the living and the dead. Why do people in Japan talk to their food to thank its spirit or worship their ancestors as if they were literally standing in the room? The philosopher Omori Shuzo provides a radical mind-bending explanation using the concept of four-dimensionalism, or space-time. If you look at a long wall, just because your vision is blocked and you can't see the other end doesn't mean the other end doesn't exist. It simply exists at a different point in space. Omori argues we should view time the exact same way. People from the past are not gone. They simply exist at a different point in the dimension of time. Their existence is still very much present within the massive four-dimensional block of spacetime. This worldview makes Shinto practices entirely coherent. Communicating with spirits is possible because they actually coexist with us, just at a different temporal coordinate, fostering a completely natural acceptance of death. At this point, you might be thinking, wait a minute, if Japanese culture is fundamentally about gentle ambiguity, how do we possibly explain the rigid, fanatical militarism of the mid 20th century? This seeming contradiction is the ultimate test of the theory. The answer is that militarism was not a product of traditional Japanese ambiguity, it was a forceful, modern rejection of it. Traditionally, Japanese society was built on the family, which featured ambiguous power dynamics balancing vertical and horizontal relationships. But with a Meiji Restoration and the importation of the logic of capitalism, the state actively sought the elimination of ambiguity, creating a clear, centralized nation state with a single absolute authority. This logic of eliminating ambiguity was then violently projected outward onto the world. The attempt to build an empire was a tragic, catastrophic attempt to impose a single, unambiguous center onto a highly complex world, replacing native nuance with imported, rigid certainty. Our journey through this philosophical kaiseki reveals that Aimai is so much more than just a quirky cultural trait. It is a highly sophisticated worldview that manages to find profound beauty in the unsaid, deep wisdom in the uncertain, and immense depth in the contingent events of our lives. Today, we live in an age absolutely dominated by big data, algorithms, and a relentless, exhausting pursuit of complete certainty. In this environment, the philosophy of Aimai offers us a vital, refreshing alternative. It reminds us to slow down and truly appreciate the subjective human experience. It asks us to value the uniqueness of the here and now, and to remember the rich, beautiful possibilities that will always exist just beyond the reach of our computer models. Ultimately, Aimai is a beautiful philosophy for finding genuine meaning in a world that can never and should never be fully known. Thank you so much for joining me on this exploration today.